welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be talking about what I read in 2024. So if you're here to listen to a nerdy little girl yap about her nerdy little interest, then you've come to the right place. In 2024, I had a goal to read 12 books for the whole entire year, and I'm really proud to say that I achieved the goal, which is kind of a big deal because I really have not been able to read for fun probably since high school or really even middle school. This is the most books that I have read in a very long time. When I think about the last time that I read for fun on a consistent basis, my mind immediately goes to Hunger Games, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter. I was definitely one of those kids. And that was a long time ago. So I'm really proud of myself for being able to read 12 books in a whole year. And I'd say about half of these books were books that we read in my queer women's book club that I'm a part of. And the other half are some other stuff that we'll get into. Thankfully, I read most of them on my Kindle. I got a Kindle, I think for Christmas last year. I actually read probably 75 to 80% of the 12 books that I read this year on this Kindle. And the other ones I read were borrowed copies from the library or from a friend, or I did listen to one audiobook on Spotify. Premium. You know, who knew? Well, now I know, but I didn't know before. But my Kindle really helped me to be able to read more and connect with that inner child part of myself that just really missed reading, and she just, you know, adult Malinda doesn't always have the energy or the time to read for fun, but that's what I thought. You know, like when I was in college, definitely things were difficult, but in my adult life, now that I'm out of school and I'm free until grad school starts, but that's a whole other thing, I've really been trying to lean into this time period of my gap year that I've had and read for fun, reconnect with that part of myself, reconnect with the joy of, you know, childhood and the commitment that I felt to reading. I really use reading as an escape, and it's a really beneficial and healthy coping tool for me. So let's get into the books that I read this year. I'm gonna try my best throughout this video to not give any spoilers for anything, and if I do, I will either let you know or I will edit it out. So I'm gonna be looking at my notes on my laptop as I talk about this. The first book that I read was Sunburn, which is by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This was a queer book club book. It's set in the early 1990s. What a beautiful time. It's actually set in an Irish village called Crossmore, and the main character's name is Lucy. Lucy feels out of place. Despite her fierce friendship, she's always felt this way, and the conventional path of marriage and motherhood doesn't appeal to her at all. Amen, Lucy. Absolutely. Lucy begins to make sense of herself during a long, hot summer when a spark with her school friend Susanna escalates to an all-consuming infatuation and very quickly to a desperate and devastating love. Fearful of rejection from her small and conservative community, Lucy begins living a double life, hiding the most honest parts of herself in stolen moments with Susanna. But with the end of school and the opportunity to leave Crossmore looming, Lucy must choose between two places, two people, and two futures. Each is terrifying as the other, but only one can offer her real happiness. Sunburn is really a beautiful portrayal of like a tender first love, coming of age. There's lots of anxiety in this book, and just, you know, the reality of growing up in a small town where people are kind of like stuck in tradition or stuck in their ways, or they're really caught up in the way that other people perceive them. Definitely lots of yearning in this one. You know, it covers the topic, I would say, of a gay awakening, and there's definitely some repression. Have a side of repression with your gay awakening, but you know, just the pressure to go along with societal expectations, dysfunctional family, separation of lovers at times. There's also some religious connotations, especially because I think Lucy is Irish Catholic, and I'd say most of her community is as well. But some of the quotes that touch on this include, "Never in all my years of Christianity has there been talk of an angel like this," or, "To be with her is a sin, to be without her is a tragedy." That's just beautiful. And another theme in this story is about the main character getting to know herself better. There's also some self-denial. And another quote that I have from this book, written from Lucy's perspective, is, "All Susanna wants to do is run away, and all Martin wants to do is settle down. and I realized that I've only ever thought of ways to keep everyone happy, so I have no idea what I want. Which I think is heartbreaking. I will admit, I felt a lot of frustration at this main character because I guess her inability to make a decision at times really drove me nuts, and I wanted to grab her and throttle her and be like, Lucy, come on, girl, like, we gotta do something. We gotta make a choice. We gotta set some boundaries. We gotta, make some stuff happen, because life is not gonna hand itself to you. You have to reach out and take it. I'm a really firm believer in that. Yeah, there are some really beautiful parts in this book. I really did enjoy this book a lot. It's different from things that I would normally read, I think, but it was the first book that we read in the Queer Women's Book Club, and for that reason especially, it will hold a special place in my heart. The next book that I read, this is mostly in chronological order, I read Enrique's Journey by Sonia Nazario. This is a nonfiction, I don't want to say a retelling, but the author of this book interviews a boy named Enrique and his mother Lourdes, who are undocumented immigrants to the United States from Honduras, I believe. It just tells of their family separation, their story, their reuniting together, and all the struggles that come along the way. There's a lot of heartbreak in this book. There's a lot of sacrifice. I mean, it's a real life story of poverty and the effects of immigration, the effects of family separation, really at its core. Broken promises from your family and from society, or, country, or just these institutions that we place our trust in or our belief in, and just dealing with the hardships that life throws your way. In this book, Enrique is immigrating. Basically, he's train hopping to get to America, for the better life that's promised in America. But his expectations tend to fall short of the reality that awaits him when he gets there. And it kind of seems like one set of problems is traded for another. So it's a beautiful book. It's a really heartbreaking book. I think that everyone should read this. This should be required reading in schools, because this is a topic that's very, very close to my heart, and I just want people to have more empathy and understanding of what it really takes for people to leave their home and everything that they've ever known to go to a place where, they don't speak the language, or their family's not there, their friends aren't there, they don't, they have to start from scratch completely. I think as a society, we would really benefit from listening to people tell their stories about immigration, respecting them, uplifting them, and supporting them, and just really, really having some empathy for that whole conversation. So, the next book was also a book that we read in my Queer Women's Book Club. I actually picked this one out because I saw that Florence and the Machine, she's one of my top 5 favorite artists, she actually recommended this book. That was the only reason that we picked it, or that I picked it, and the group approved of it. It turned out to be weird. Oh my gosh. So the book is called Our Wives Under the Sea, and it's by Julia Armfield. There's Leah and Miri, her wife. So we have some lesbians already, fantastic. And Leah is a marine biologist, and she goes on these expeditions to, in the submarines underneath the ocean to explore things and study, and she's supposed to be gone, I think, for 6 weeks, and she ends up being gone for 6 months. And when she comes back, her wife Miri is, of course, absolutely happy to see her, but things are different. And you'll see what I mean if you read this book. So it's weird. I would say that this is a book about grief at its core, and specifically like anticipatory grief, mourning something that is still in your life and hasn't left you yet, but you're going through that mourning process, and watching the person that you love slowly slip away. There is, like I said, there's some lovely lesbian representation, but again, kind of like in Sunburn, it's kind of dysfunctional, which irritates me. We all want our happy ending, but I guess it wouldn't be literature if it was all happy endings. We have to have some struggle and strife. And yeah, there's just themes of loss, absence, transformation, what it means to leave and what it means to stay. And also another big theme of this book is vulnerability and the difficulties that come with navigating that, whether you're withholding vulnerability and you're afraid to be vulnerable with people and open up about what you're going through, the effects that that can have on you, or gaining the courage, I think, to be vulnerable and realizing that it brings you closer to people. Also, this book is set in England. I don't think I said that. This is definitely what I would call slow horror. Like, it's really scary, but it takes its time, and it builds the tension, it builds the suspense over time. It was really impossible for me to put this down. And I really love the marine biology aspect. I love the ocean quotes, the motifs, and the metaphors about the ocean and the sea. I'm not a science kid, but I think in another life I would be a STEM girly. Quotes on here that I like are, "To know the ocean, I've always felt, is to recognize the teeth it keeps half hidden." And the thing about losing someone isn't the loss, but the absence afterward, the endlessness of that. So again, heavy. It's kind of heavy, so prepare yourself for that. But I would say this book really sticks with you. And honestly, I think it would make a fantastic movie. It would make a crazy movie, but I would see it in theaters for sure. And the next book on this list is The Long Way Home by Rachel Spangler. This was also a queer book club book. I have some more critiques about this one. The vibes that I get from this book are, the writing quality of it feels like a Wattpad novel to me. So in that way, it's nostalgic. If I had to categorize this book, I would say it's kind of like a lesbian dollar store romance. Again, we have themes of queerness and repression and, a small conservative town, but there's also found family and hope within that. And the setting is in Darlington, Illinois, middle of nowhere, Illinois. Also, this book talks about reinvention of self, which I really like, but it comes at a cost for this character. Again, we have our strained family dynamics. Is it a lesbian book if there's not some family tension? And in this book, the main character, her original name is Rory, but she changes it to Rain St. James. And she comes home to the small town that she's basically been trash talking for the past 10 years. Whenever she left, her claim to fame was basically that she ran away from home and she was a queer youth. Well, 10 years have passed. She's probably 30. She's not exactly, 30 is young. Okay, I believe 30 is young, and I look forward to my 30s, but she's not exactly a queer youth anymore. And she's kind of coming to terms with the fact that her decisions that she's made are not really the best, and her hometown in Darlington, Illinois offers her a job as a teaching professor at the university, Bramble University. And it's basically the only job opportunity that she's getting. And homegirl, I think she gets evicted, is broken up with in the beginning, or maybe she breaks it off, I can't remember. But things are not going well for Miss Rain St. James in the beginning of this book, and she has to go back to her hometown to fix her stuff and really accept herself. Something that the author wrote about this book when I was reading the preface: for many of us, the need to get away in order to find ourselves is still part of our coming out stories, but this is not one of those stories. This book is about going back and having the courage to stay. That really resonates with me because I don't think that we really hear enough about those stories of queer people loving where they come from and choosing to stay. I am one of those people. I don't think there's many of us out there. So I love the representation of that. And also, I would say this book talks about recognizing the good in your past and in your hometown, and not just writing everything off as a troubling experience or a negative. And really, this book is about humans are complex and dynamic beings, and we all have the capacity to change and grow. Oh, another quote that I wrote down about this book is, trying to avoid pain and strife, she never got to fully experience joy or peace either. That's deep. So the next book that we read in the Queer Women's Book Club is Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink. I want to start out by talking about Welcome to Night Vale. So I love Welcome to Night Vale. I love Within the Wires. I love the whole Night Vale Presents universe that they have going on. So that being said, if you're not familiar with the podcast Welcome to Night Vale or Within the Wires or any of the Night Vale media, then this book might be an acquired taste for you, because like Our Wives Under the Sea, it is weird. Again, we have our lovely married lesbians. We have Keisha and we have Alice. Alice is missing. She's presumed dead, but Keisha, her wife, realizes very soon that Alice isn't dead. Keisha becomes a truck driver, so lesbian truck driver, give it to me. I'm here for it, okay? But basically she's searching for her wife and road tripping all across America, driving to find her wife and prove that she isn't dead. Yeah, basically she's trying to find her wife, bring her home, and also Alice has got some explaining to do since she just left without saying anything. So I would say, again, similar to Our Wives Under the Sea, this book is what I would call slow horror, where it's very scary, but the tension builds over time. And it's just gross. There are some parts of this that are very graphic, I would say. It's very tense, it's full of suspense, it's just weird AF, but you can't put it down because you're scared of what's gonna happen to Keisha when she's driving around in her truck and encountering all this stuff. You really worry for her safety, and I felt like I bonded with her. But again, once again, like I said, Our Wives Under the Sea, we have a wife who has disappeared for a length of time, and the story is mainly told through the perspective of the wife that was left behind. I would also really like to see the reverse perspective of this, told from the wife who left the other behind and the guilt that she feels. I will say I have not listened to the audiobook Alice Isn't Dead. I read it on my Kindle. I know that the audiobook is different from the released printed version or the Kindle version or whatever. Also in this book, I would say there is a little bit of found family. There is definitely some bonding together through shared trauma with Keisha and the people that she meets along the way while she's searching for her wife Alice. And there's also just, endlessly wandering in pursuit of your lost love, following the clues along the way. Homegirl Keisha has major anxiety, I will say that. And when I was reading the acknowledgments, I discovered that Joseph Fink, the author himself, also struggles with anxiety, which surprised me to hear someone that I consume their media and I enjoy what they have to say, not knowing that aspect about him, I guess. He talked about how this book helped him through his journey and coming to terms with it. And this book will definitely make you anxious, so be prepared for that. But something that I love about Keisha is that even when her anxiety really cripples her, she doesn't allow it to define her, which is super important. And in the book, another quote that I wrote down is, "The only way to be brave is to first be afraid." Another quote is, "Alice had made herself a mystery, and now everything she left was a clue. She was a missing persons case, and everything she had ever touched was evidence, right down to Keisha's hands, her skin, the abandoned wife, Exhibit A." There's lots of conflict and conspiracy, alternate reality kind of vibes. And someone on Goodreads described Welcome to Night Vale, the podcast, as like an acid trip with bath salts. I have to disagree. I have to say that would be a perfect way to describe Alice Isn't Dead. Like an acid trip with bath salts, because Welcome to Night Vale for me just feels really homey and safe and mysterious and nonsensical, because it's a radio show where someone is sharing, local weather, news, and cultural events from a town where every conspiracy theory is true. So it kind of has Welcome to Night Vale vibes, but it's also it's different. It's very different. It is like an acid trip with bath salts for sure. But yeah, another quote, one last quote that I'm going to share from this book is that a life does not have to be satisfying or triumphant. A life does not have to mean anything or lead anywhere. A life does not need direction or a goal, but sometimes a person is lucky enough to have a life with all that anyway, which is really sweet. The next book that I'm going to talk about was another book that we read in the Queer Women's Book Club. It was called Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. I loved this book. I have to say, I think if I had to pick a favorite, this would be my favorite. I listened to the audiobook of this on Spotify with my premium membership. Let me just say, I've been loving the Spotify audiobooks lately, and the narrator's voice drove me nuts. I'm sorry. She had such a monotone voice. It was very difficult for me to listen to, but I really enjoyed the book. I think if I had read it in a physical copy or maybe on my Kindle, it would have been different, but I don't think it was at my library, so that's why I listened to the audiobook. Even still, that did not take away from my experience reading this book. This is a historical fiction book set in the 1950s, in San Francisco's Chinatown during the Red Scare. And it talks about Lily, who is our main character. She's Chinese American, and Kathleen, who is her crush, her little girlfriend, her little boo thing. The title of the book comes from a lesbian bar called the Telegraph Club, which really serves as a safe haven for Lily and her friends, and the exploration of queer identity, coming of age, womanhood, and found/chosen family. Again, we have the theme of risking everything, including the love of your family for the love of your life, discovering what it means to hold two cultures within yourself. So Lily is Chinese American, and she's caught in between that, you know, the beauty and the struggle that comes with that, and the challenges that come from being both Chinese and American and queer, lesbian, in a time that none of those things were really celebrated or recognized. I'd say, again, at the heart of this book, there is self-discovery, self-love, and just realizing the love that's in front of you. So this book really leaves an impact on you, and the characters grow on you for sure. I was sad to finish this book, and I really missed Lily afterwards. We have lovable characters, a really sweet, innocent romance, and the setting was very interesting and believable. So it was very good stuff. The descriptions that the author wrote were very vivid, very engaging. I felt like I was there in Chinatown in the 1950s, San Francisco. Oh yeah, someone on Goodreads, their name is Steph. So thank you, Steph, on Goodreads. I'm gonna paraphrase some of the stuff that you said here because I agree with a lot of what you said. So Steph said this book was about dreaming about outer space and things bigger than your world, tender first love, close family bonds and conflict, childhood friendships that eventually run their course, that's a big one, and the sobering realization that you are not the nice straight kid that everyone expects you to be. But most of all, this is a novel about the need for representation. At the start of the novel, Lily just realizes that she's different in some way, but she doesn't recognize how. She finds what I was talking about earlier, a lesbian dollar store romance at her version of the dollar store, and she kind of becomes obsessed with it. She really has a desperate need to find this representation, to see this otherness that she feels represented in other people around her or even in the media. She feels very lonely and isolated throughout this book as well. She goes through and she finds these, I think, newspaper or magazine clippings for a male impersonator named Tommy, I think it's Tommy Andrews. And she also kind of becomes obsessed with Tommy Andrews. She feels that spark of recognition, you know, she feels that hope in her that maybe someone else is different in the way that she's different, and maybe someone out there understands. So she finds her way to the Telegraph Club, and it just opens up her world to, you know, women, loving women, having a good time. It really shocks her, definitely. And she's also the only Asian American woman in this space, which is, you know, not super surprising, but I'm happy that she's able to find the representation that she so desperately needs with regard to her sexuality in this space. Like I said, this book is full of beautiful cinematic imagery. I think it would make a beautiful film, truly. So again, paraphrasing Steph from Goodreads, thank you, Steph, for your contribution. Lily is thoughtful and introspective, and she just has a really good balance of being, you know, naive, but also courageous. Like, homegirl is not afraid to be brave. She's not afraid to say what she thinks. She's not afraid to go against the grain, even though it might take her a minute to build up the courage to get there. I would say that my only critique of this book is that in certain chapters, I think it's at the end of several of the parts, there are kind of these flashback moments to Lily's aunt and Lily's parents when they're first meeting each other and getting to know each other. I think they're there to provide historical context and maybe to bring these characters more to life. They really kind of broke my concentration when I was reading this book, and I find them confusing because I want to get back to Lily and Kath and see what's going on with them. But it was good to have that background, but I think maybe the novel could have done without that. So Lily's story really came alive for me, and it's clear that Malinda Lo is just, she very thoroughly researched this. She put a lot of time, effort, and just love into this book, and I feel like I learned so much about this specific period in time and what life might have been like for a young girl growing up in this era, in this part of the United States, with the identities that she held. Lily needed some representation of people who were like her. and she learned to live as both Chinese and American and lesbian in a time and space where none of those things were really celebrated, or really people thought that they couldn't coexist as well. So I really admire Lily and her bravery and just her willingness to be her own representation. I loved this book. It was fantastic. So this is the last book that we read in the Queer Women's Book Club for 2024, and it's called The Price of Salt by Claire Morgan, but that's just her pen name. Her real name is Patricia Highsmith. If you engage with queer media and you like some lesbian movies like I do, or you might know the film adaptation Carol, I think it's on Netflix. So the film Carol is based on this book, The Price of Salt, just for some clarity. And again, we're set in 1953. Love some 50s lesbian representation. I would describe this book as a timeless classic. The Price of Salt was published in 1952, and I would say that reading this book, it does not feel like it was written a long time ago. Of course, there are some differences in the language, there are some differences in the writing, some words, or maybe some social things that maybe we don't do anymore, or we do in a different way. There's definitely no technology, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's nothing like that, and I love books like that really just take you back to the pre-technology boom. I really believe it was a simpler time in many ways, not to glorify the past, because there's always beautiful and terrible things in the past and challenges that come with that. But I really enjoy consuming media where we don't have cell phones, we don't have computers, we don't have the internet, and they have to use maps and the road signs to get around, and they have to leave telegrams and phone calls and write letters to each other and voicemails, and you know, just the way that people traveled back then, and the way that they got around, and the way that they communicated, just how anyone back then ever got anything done, or ever how people were able to meet up across the country or go on trips. It just baffles me. It's so mind-blowing to me, because that's probably the one thing that I need technology for, is the maps. I love representation of that time in history because I think it's really special, and it's very interesting to me because it's so different from how things are now. And sometimes I think we should return in some ways, or we should at least not be so dependent on technology to help us. We really need to know how to get around on our own in case these things are taken away from us. The Price of Salt was adapted into the film Carol, which I have seen before. It's been a while. I would like to rewatch it since I recently read the book. Kind of like a May-December storyline where one of the characters is much older than is usually socially acceptable or maybe appropriate than the other one. So we have an age gap relationship. Therese is trying to break into set design in New York City, and right now she's working at a retail store during the holiday season, which would be my personal hell. So there's that aspect of the book, which is kind of painful. And then all that changes one day. You know, she's working at her retail job. She's bored to death. She's kind of miserable, honestly. I would say she's depressed, especially in the beginning of the book. And then Carol walks in. And Carol is the sunshine parting through the clouds, and Carol changes her life in many unexpected ways. If I had to describe this book, I would say that it's a look at infatuation and obsession. You know, there's the whole forbidden relationship and complicated family dynamics as well. And the relationship being forbidden is not just because it's queer and it's two women. I would say it's also the age gap thing that makes it feel a little taboo, a little strange. This is another story about a character who doesn't know what they want, who is finding themselves out along the way. And I would say it's also about, there's lots of yearning. So we love some lesbian yearning, but this book is full of yearning and loneliness and just feeling misunderstood. Therese really struggles to communicate and be clear with her intentions. Which really frustrates me. She's also very naive. I would say that she has lived a pretty sheltered life. Her coworkers, the other people that she spent time with in the book, she just seemed really judgmental of them. And I really couldn't understand why. She keeps this judgment inside of her. She doesn't say it to their face, really. But I would love to see this book from Carol's perspective, because if you want a story about two ladies in love in 1950s America road tripping across the country together, this is your story, okay? And it's just such an odd book, but I really love the style of writing that Patricia Highsmith has. This book also touches on sacrifice. Again, we have the themes of choosing between your family and choosing between your romantic love. Therese also just has absolutely no empathy for anyone, which, again, I said irritates me because I don't really relate to that. And while she's not exactly a likable character, this book is really intense and hard to put down. The vibes of this book, I would say, in the beginning, especially when she's working in the retail store, but also just kind of as a steady theme throughout, the book feels very bleak. We have the highs and the emotion and the lust and the excitement that comes with love, and then we also just have, you know, this roller coaster of despair and longing and loneliness and separation. So it's up and down and up and down and up and down. And you feel that wave as the reader. It's kind of exhausting, honestly, but you really feel what Therese is feeling, and you feel her emotions, and you feel her struggle, and, you know, her joy and her confusion and her frustration and her fear. Therese really grows and transforms throughout this novel, but it's very subtle and I would say realistic over time. In the beginning, she's very vulnerable and naive and utterly obsessed with Carol, but as the book goes on, you see that she matures into a more confident young woman, and she understands more of who Carol is and what she must be going through. It's just a very thoughtful book. Therese does have a relationship with a man, I think, earlier in the book, or kind of on and off throughout the book. It parallels the book Sunburn that I was talking about previously, where our main lovely lady, female character, who is very gay, is with a man not out of, you know, desire or attraction, but really out of convenience, which I think is heartbreaking for both parties involved. But there's that as well, which is kind of like a struggle, point of contention. Yeah, so this book really captures the feeling of being trapped. You know, Carol is trapped in her marriage and her duties of domestic life and maybe motherhood to a certain extent. And Therese is trapped in her day job, and they're both trying to break out of these roles that society has put them in and the expectations, and kind of forge their own way throughout it. And I would say that the author captures the ecstasy and the agony of a new love really well. Last but not least, I will admit that I read the complete ACOTAR series. I started with A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Wings and Ruin, A Court of Frost and Starlight, and A Court of Silver Flames, all by Sarah J. Maas. Ooh, I have some feelings on these books, okay? These books reminded me of something that my inner teen would really love and enjoy. Things are kind of slow in A Court of Thorns and Roses. I would say definitely my favorite one out of the entire series is either A Court of Mist and Fury, the second book, or A Court of Silver Flames, which is the fifth book, which is told from Nesta's perspective. These books were kind of slow for me, kind of dragged on at points, but then at other times I really couldn't put them down. I read the last 3 books during Hurricane Helene, and they really got me through that difficult time, so they are important to me for that reason as well. I read them on my Kindle because my Kindle was charged, and I really didn't have anything else to do during that time. Where I live was essentially cut off from the entire world. We had no internet, we had no cell service for days and days and days, or it was really hard to get cell service. It was hard to get internet. So I just had my Kindle, I had the books that I downloaded, and I was just reading the entire time, which really saved me and controlled my anxiety and got me through that. I love these books and I dislike them at the same time, because let me tell you, I'm not here for the spicy smut. I am not here for it. It's so straight and it makes me roll my eyes. We need some queer representation, okay? Not just with a side character, but we need somebody who's getting into some action in this series. I need some more queer representation with the fantasy genre just as a whole. But I will say too, y'all don't come for me with this, but Feyre gets on my nerves. Ugh. She has no friends of her own, and homegirl has some issues, okay? She really does. And a lot of her issues arise from her own stupidity, and she's just annoying with her insatiable desire to always do the opposite of what other people tell her to. And it's not always in her best interest. There were so many times I wanted to grab her and shake her and be like, girl, what are you doing? You're not helping your situation. So, but I loved reading A Court of Silver Flames because it was from Nesta's perspective, and I hated Nesta throughout the whole book series. So when this book came around, I was like, oh, how am I going to read this? How am I going to enjoy it if it's from her perspective? Because I hated her. But honestly, it was a relief and a respite from Feyre and her perspective, which was driving me up the wall. I really want Asriel to have some screen time, and Elaine, I would love to hear stuff from her point of view. Lucien as well. My poor guy, give him a break, okay? Give him a break because he's been through so much. And I want to see things through his eyes, or even Amryn, or the Morrigan. More. I'd love to hear some of her story. And literally anyone else besides Feyre, okay? Literally anyone else besides her. I got so sick of her. You know, if there is a next book, I think there might be talk of one, they should have it be from Asriel or Elaine's perspective, or Lucien, or just anyone, please. I'm begging you. I will say this is a spoiler, so skip ahead if you haven't read the whole series, but ever since Feyre and Rhys got pregnant, they became so annoying and insufferable, and I just could not stand them. I don't know what it was, but I felt like their whole personalities changed. And I know there was a lot at stake, but did you really need to act that way for so many hundreds of pages? I think not. Something I will say is that I really liked the religious system in the book and the world building that came with that. Priestesses, the library, and the lore. I would love for all of that to have some more screen time as well. I really love the twists and turns that came throughout the first couple of books. I thought it was very exciting, and I really enjoyed the world building. I am a world building hoe, okay? Give it to me, give me the details, give me the language, give me the maps, give me the lore, the backstory, everything. I love world building. I think it's so exciting. Though I think I really tended to like the side characters more than Feyre until Rhys was introduced as a main character in A Court of Mist and Fury. Yeah, the second one. Yeah, because that was my favorite one, and we kind of see his arc and his, you know, her perception of him change, and just him as a character, I think, really grows once we pull back the curtain a little bit. If I had to summarize this whole, like the first book and her relationship with Tamlin, so maybe this is a spoiler too. Skip ahead. The cost that comes from sacrificing who you are for someone that you love is not worth it. And I will die on that hill. We could make a whole video about that, but that was a really key takeaway for me. That's something that I think we need more representation of in the media. Of course, sacrifice is a huge theme and it's relevant to life, but my last kind of critique of Sarah J. Maas is, you know, the writing style itself is really inconsistent. I would say it's poorly done, but Wattpad vibes for sure. But I'm living for the plot, I'm living for the characters, not the quality of writing. And, you know, there are also lots of problematic behaviors from characters that I won't necessarily explain here. You can definitely go to Reddit or Goodreads if you want to get the tea on that, like I have, and for a more comprehensive overview of these issues. Yeah, I would say those are my thoughts on the ACOTAR books. I love them. I hated them at times. Sometimes I really disliked them, but all in all, I would say that I enjoyed them. So, and it really took me back to that inner child, inner teen that I was talking about in the beginning of this video. So yeah, that's all the books that I read in 2024, all 12 of them. So thank you so much for watching this video. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble about these books and what I loved about them, what I didn't like about them, and everything in between. For 2025, my goal is to read 24 books in a year, so I'm doubling my goal from last year, so we'll see how that goes. Stick around and I'll make another video when the time is right talking about that. Happy reading. Get yourself a Kindle if you want one, or get books on Thrift Books or Abe Books, ABE books.com. Buy your books secondhand if you have to buy them, but I would say borrow them from the library. Support your local library and borrow books from the library as much as you can. I wish you the best.